Thanks for stopping by to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the McIntosh MC30 mono power amplifier. McIntosh sold these between 1954 to 1962 at a cost of $153, which would be about $1,700 today. A quick search on eBay, and this would be in March of 2023, was able to find one for $3,100. Just one. The MC30 was rated at 30 watts into 8 ohms at a THD of less than 0.5%. It listed a frequency response of 20 Hz to 30 kHz of not more than 0.1 dB variation. I don't know what they were smoking back then, but anyway, that's what they listed it as. This lovely pair of MC30s was provided to me to test by my good buddy Richard. He said I could check them out, and while I did not find anything wrong with them, I was able to improve the measurable performance by doing a tube swap. Now, it happened accidentally, and I swapped the 6L6 GC output tubes from this amp to this amp and that amp over to this amp. When I remeasured them, the data looked better. Whether there would have been an audible difference, I really don't know. The problems I saw were more at higher power levels, like above 20 watts, but they look much better with that tube swap that I did. It may have to do with the tubes. None of the tubes are really matched that are in this either unit, from what I can tell. That being said, what I'm going to do now is give you a tour of the outside of the MC30, and then I'll pop the bottom cover off and show you what the inside circuitry kind of looks like. After the data, like I usually do in my videos, I'll have a little discussion of my listening opinion as well as just some general other comments about the amplifier. So if you have some popcorn or beer, a cup of coffee, get it out and we'll get into the MC30 a bit. This is either the front or side view of the MC30. For me, I think it would be the front view because I would want to proudly display that pretty McIntosh logo. As far as the tube complement, right here is a 12AX7, followed by a 12AU7, followed by a 12BH7. Here is another 12AX7, and this guy right here is the rectifier tube, and that is a 5U4GA. This is our capacitor can here, and the output tubes are these guys here. They originally were 1614s, but now they're 6L6 GTs. Your power transformer is this guy right here, and the auto former transformer for your speakers is that guy right there. Here is the business end of the MC30. We'll start over here. We have a gain control pot there. Now it appears you can get about 31, maybe 32 dB of gain out of the MC30. I did all of my testing with a gain of around 25. I thought that worked out the best. Here is a hum adjustment control, and basically that seemed to work best full clockwise or nearly full clockwise. Here is our normal RCA preamp input. You also could have a preamp hook up this way. If you look at the schematic, it does things a little bit differently if you use this preamp input rather than this guy right here. And there actually is a 0.5 volt input which could be put in on these terminals here. These other guys are your speaker terminals. We have 16 ohms, 8 ohms, and 4 ohms, and then this guy right here is the common. We do have an output here that you could use instead of using these terminals to drive your speaker. We have an unswitched AC outlet there and our power cord, and this is a user replaceable fuse. And this is the other end of the MC30 showing the specifications, which was kind of cool that McIntosh labeled the specifications for their amplifier on the amplifier itself. Here's an inside view of one of the MC30s, just to kind of show you what it looks like on the inside. We have 4 of the, I will call them the preamplifier driver tubes there. This tube right here would be the rectifier tube, and the output tubes are down here, the 6L6 GCs. The filter supply capacitors are under here, And then it's just kind of showing you the technology used to build the MC30. Now, from what I can tell, most of the components have been replaced. You can see that all the resistors on this board have been replaced from what I can tell, and one capacitor right here has been replaced. I'll show the other side of the board down here, and you can see the capacitors there that have been replaced as well. So this unit has been refurbished or rebuilt, I guess you would say. And now we're going to look at another view of the inside of the MC30. So here is another view of the inside of the MC30. And this is the capacitor side of the circuit board. As far as I can tell, all the capacitors have been replaced with the exception of this bumblebee capacitor. Everybody loves those, so that was not replaced apparently. You can see some of the pots over here as well as the AC. Here's the AC fuse, here's the unswitched AC outlet, and you have some connectors here for the preamp, I believe. Here is another view still, and this guy right here is the hum adjust potentiometer, and this is your gain adjust potentiometer. The socket kind of right here, this is your preamp input. If you didn't want to use the RCA, you could use a socket for your preamp input. And this guy right here is an output socket, so you could build an adapter that you could plug into that to go to your speakers. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kHz with the MC30s putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohms. Note that they are adjusted so that we've got about 25 dB of gain. And you can see that the THD is looking pretty good. I would say we'll call it 0.07%. And the SNRs are above 60. Also note that at 120 Hertz there is a power supply or a capacitor related hum. Here we have the frequency response of the MC30 amplifiers, and you can see that at the high end of the band it's looking pretty good, maybe 0.3 of a dB down. At the low end of the band, the right channel is down 0.8 of a dB at 20 Hertz, but by 30 Hertz it's only down 0.3 of a dB, and the left channel is only down 0.4 of a dB at 20 Hertz. And both channels are pretty well balanced throughout most of the band. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kHz with both MC30s putting out about 30 watts into 8 ohms. Now the specification at that condition was a THD of less than 0.5%. We can see that the left channel is meeting that requirement and the right channel is just a tad bit above that. The SNRs are both around, we'll say 69 dB, and the right channel appears to have a higher THD plus noise, and that's mainly because that third harmonic is fairly high on the right channel. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kHz with just the left channel MC30 being shown, and it is putting out 35 watts into 8 ohms, which is beyond the spec requirement, and the distortion is still less than the 0.5% THD. The SNR dropped a bit from 30 watts, it's what, 68 dB, so it's not too bad. The THD plus noise is coming up, but overall this thing is still doing a pretty good job at 35 watts. Here's the THD SNR plot at 1 kHz with the output powers about 15 watts into 8 ohms. So I dropped the input level down to about -4 dBV. This looks pretty good here. The distortion is pretty good. We'll say it's less than 0.2%. And the SNRs are in the upper 60 dB range. The THD plus noise is still, I don't know, in the mid-50s, let's call it. But overall, it does look fairly decent at 15 watts, which would be a lot of power into a pair of efficient loudspeakers. Here we have the frequency response of the left channel's MC30, with it putting out 30 watts into 8 ohms. And this actually doesn't look so bad. It's really only down 0.3 of a dB at the band edges, which is pretty good. It's not the 1/10 of a dB that the McIntosh specified back in 1962 or so, but it's pretty respectable. So maybe their plus or minus 1/10 of a dB frequency response wasn't too far off, considering that was 62 years ago. Here we have the multi-tone response for the pair of MC30s, and it shows between a 10 to 11 bit distortion-free range. Here we have the noise level of the pair of MC30s, and this is taken with both inputs terminated into shorts. What you see is a rather large hum at 60 Hertz. That would be the largest peak. That's down about maybe 45 dB. And then you see some other hum bars, I will call them, at 120, 180, and 240 Hertz that are in the minus 60 dB to minus 70 dB range. You are going to hear the hum bar at 60 Hertz when you are close to the speakers, but once the music is playing, you would not notice it. This graph shows the THD versus frequency for a couple different power levels into 8 ohms for the MC30s. The left channel MC30 is doing a really good job at 20 watts. Its worst case THD is less than 0.5%. And now the right channel has some THD issues once it gets above 10 watts. We didn't really see that when I was just looking at 1 kilohertz, but here you can see that as the power level is increased at 20 watts, the distortion, particularly at the lower end of the band, is up above 10%. This graph shows the harmonics with the MC30s putting out 20 watts into 8 ohms, and this is with a 1 kilohertz tone applied, which would be the fundamental. And you can see the second harmonic, which would be the first pair to the right of the fundamental on the way left, is higher than the third harmonic. And then if you go over to the fourth harmonic, that is higher than the fifth harmonic for both channels. So it's showing, in this case, under these conditions, the even harmonics are higher than the odd order harmonics, which is often the case with tube amplifiers, but not always. This last plot shows the output impedance of the MC30s. It is done using the 8 ohm tap, and when the 4 ohm load is connected, it is also connected to the 8 ohm tap. It shows a worst case of about 2.5 ohms at 20 hertz for the right channel MC30, and it's pretty much 1 ohms across most of the band for the left channel amplifier. That translates to a damping factor of about 8 for the left channel MC30 and a damping factor of about 5 if we use the 1 kilohertz impedance value for the right channel. I tested the MC30s as a stereo pair like you would normally use them, and I found that they met most of the specifications from the 1950s. There was some distortion at the low frequency end, I believe below 100 hertz on the right amplifier. I'm not sure which of these two was the right amplifier right now, but that guy had some distortion when you reached the power of about 20 watts. Below 20 watts, it looked okay. So other than that, for the most part, they looked really good, I thought, as far as specification wise. The damping factor was maybe 4, where the specification was above 10, I believe, but that seems to be in line with the damping of some other tube amplifiers that I have checked out. I forgot to mention the weight of the MC30, and that is 30 pounds, just for information's sake. For my listening test, I allowed the MC30s to warm up for a half hour before I really started listening to them. I hooked them up to my La Scala loudspeakers, and they were driven by my Carver C1 preamplifier. I listened to a variety of music, and I thought they did really, really good. So with 1 watt, I was able to hit 90 dB SPLs with the combination that I had. Now, it's a smaller room than my normal listening room where I'm recording this video, but it does not take a lot of power with the La Scalas. And that is really loud. 90 dB SPL is a very loud level. And that was with 1 watt measured using my realistic APM 100 power meter that was attached to the output of the amplifiers. When I was playing that loud in a quiet passage, I could hear some hiss. I'll talk more about the hiss in a few moments. So I decided to crank things up with a track called Slow Reduction, and it has a lot of bass in it. And I was hitting about 10 watts according to the APM 100 power meters, and the sound pressure level was 95 dB at that point, which was really good, and there is really no need for a subwoofer at that point. I should point out that I did have the bass and treble controls on the C1 adjusted for more treble and more bass. So with about 1 watt of power as measured by the APM 100 power meter, I was able to hit between 85 and 90 dB SPL. I also think that the Mac took a bit of the harshness from the La Scalas away. Now, I'd have to do some more comparisons, but overall I thought that the McIntosh amplifiers just sounded kind of warm and smooth, and there was plenty of highs in the tracks that I listened to that have a lot of highs, and it had the detail that I'm used to hearing with other amps and systems. So I thought that the amps just did an outstanding job. In fact, I think even my good buddy Ian would have liked the La Scala MC30 combination. He's not the biggest Klipsch horn speaker fan, but I think he would have enjoyed listening to the MC30s and the La Scalas paired together with the C1. I decided to crank it up a little bit louder, and when I did, I kind of plugged my ears up just a little bit. I was more curious to see what happened when I increased the power level, and I was able to hit 99 dB SPLs at about 10 watts. I never had those MC30s putting out more than 10 watts. I forget the song that I had that was playing loud, but it wasn't just bass, it was more vocals. It was really loud and it sounded really good. I didn't listen for very long, but for the period that I did it, at 99 dB, it sounded really, really good. As with a lot of amplifiers, with the inputs terminated to the amplifiers, so there's no signal going into it, the amplifier is just sitting there. I did hear a bit of hum coming out of the tweeter mid-range area. If you stand a few feet back, you don't really hear that. And what I'm going to try to do with other amplifiers to show that is actually measure it, and you can listen to what I heard. Now, I should point out that I'm using a calibrated microphone. It's kind of bore side in between the tweeter and the mid-range on the La Scalas, about 6 inches from them. So it's really close. If you were to move that back several feet, I'm guessing you would not hear that. But be that as it may, I'm going to let you listen to that little track and see the frequency contact of it. And that's just kind of for educational purposes. I will do that as I can on some of these other amplifiers. But it is normal that you hear something with most amplifiers, particularly the tube amps. This is the room ambient noise that you are listening to now. And right now I'm going to connect the amplifier to the La Scala. And now I will disconnect the amplifier. What we are looking at here is the frequency spectrum of what you just listened to. This is just another way to show the hum. Right now, this is just the noise floor of the room that the mic picked up. And I'm going to go ahead and show the actual recorded portion when the hum came on from the MC30. And that is that guy right there. And here is your 60 hertz hum right here. And then this guy right here would be 180 hertz hum. So those two peaks are from the MC30. And that is what you were actually listening to. So all that being said, these were a joy to listen to. I do think they need some time to warm up. Like I said, at least a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. Then they just sounded great. I mean, I was never going to play these things louder than what I did, which is only 10 watts. So that distortion that I measured for the one right channel amplifier at 100 hertz at 20 watts, that would not be a problem on these with the La Scalas, because 99 dB is as loud as I would ever really play with that. Maybe I go 100 just to make a round number, but for the most part, they did a great job with those speakers, and I once again am sorry to return them to Richard. Anyway, I thank you for watching again. If you have any comments, I would really like to see them below. And if you like the video, hit the like button. If you have not subscribed to the channel, that would be great. And once again, until next time, have a great day or night.